everybody. Thank you very much for joining me here today. Paul Taubman here with 9.connects. You are in the right place if you are here for our part 2 of our splunking in the Altium schematic preferences. So to get it going here pretty quickly, because we have a lot to cover in this 1 hour. Again, I will not have time for any questions. However, feel free to submit them in the questions panel. We are collecting them all. We'll put together one large Q&A / commentary at the end of this. We still have part 1 stuff that we're still holding on to, so I'd like to put that all together to make it complete. So feel free to comment on any of the preferences. And that's really all I'm going to talk about in terms of the slides here. However, the little surprise for you is this. I'm actually going to do this in Altium Designer 18. So I did download Altium Designer this past Monday. I figured no guts, no glory. Let's see what this thing's going to do for me over here. So you're going to get a little added treat in here. So in addition to me talking about the preferences, I'm also going to show you some of these new features that they added into Altium Designer 18. But before I do that, I do have a polling question for you. So we're going to put that up over here. We're kind of curious to know if you've done anything with Altium Designer 18 at this point. So we're going to get that poll up over here. So please take a moment to click on in. Looks like a little over half of you have done nothing with it. Totally understandable. Altium Designer is this 18 is a major release. I'd say it's probably about the equivalent of Altium Designer 10 in terms of what they did to it. Obviously, the interface looks very different with its charcoal gray background. And then a couple of you are saying that you've watched a few videos just to get a feel for it. Some of you have at least gone through the installation process, but may not be wanting to use it yet because you're on a project. And actually, a pretty decent number of you have jumped on in to make a go of it. So that's really great of you. All right, so let's take a look at what we've got over here. First and foremost, let's talk about the DXP preferences. It's gone. So the old DXP menu that you had here on the top left-hand side has been moved. It's been removed. The DXP was always a tip of the hat to the original name of Altium Designer, which was Designer Platform, or they called it DXP 2002, and then they changed the name to Altium Designer, I think, with the release of 2004. And so they've always kind of kept that there as kind of a tip of hat to them. Now, if you want to get to the preferences, we got to go completely to the right side of the screen, and you probably have noticed a little cog up here. So if you click on that, that will actually bring you to the system preferences. So that's where you're going to find your DXP preferences from now on, or I guess simply call them preferences. What we're going to look at over here today is we're going to look at the schematic stuff. We're going to look at graphical editing. We're going to look at the compiler. We will talk about the autofocus. We'll look at the library Autozoom, and we'll also talk about the defaults as well. So those are the ones we're going to be talking about here today. So let's get on with it here. And by the way, as I go along, I will show you some features and changes because there are some pretty substantial changes that they made in the flow. Let's see if you like them or not. I have to admit I'm growing used to them, and I think there's some really useful features that they've done. So the first one we'll talk about over here is the very first one in the graphics page. By the way, I'm hitting the letter T for tools, P for preferences. So if it comes up and I'm not going to the top right corner, that's because I'm hitting the shortcut key TP. So let's jump on over here to the graphical editing. The first one I'm going to look at here is the clipboard reference. The clipboard reference is turned off by default. So all these things, by the way, have been turned off by default. The only one I am going to turn off manually here is Objects Electrical Hotspot. I need to turn this off because it can interfere with my clipboard reference, and you'll see this as I'm going along. So that's the only one I'm going to modify. The rest of these are in the factory default settings. So I'm going to press OK with this. The idea over here with the clipboard reference is that if you want the schematic copy and paste to work the same way as the PCB side, that's what you can use this for. Okay, so just to give an example here, let me bring up this schematic document or PCB document. I was playing with it a little bit, but you know that if you're in the PCB and you do a Control-C, you get a reference. I've noticed for some reason that my Control-C has not been always responsive here, so hopefully it will come in here in just a moment. All right, so here we go. Now we got it. So Control-C. So when we do this over here, we basically can give it a point of reference. And then when we go in to do a Control-V, based off of where we gave it that reference, that's where it's going to paste it, of course, in reference to where our cursor is, and we can move it along accordingly. So if you like that feature and capability, you can add that over to the schematic side as well. So let's go over here to the graphical one. So if I do a copy with this, let's say I'm going to copy this and I do a Control-C. All right, I don't have the clipboard reference turned on yet. If I turn Control-V, it's going to put my cursor in a general location somewhere on that primitive there, and then I can place it down. However, if I turn this on, I'm going to get that same effect that I see on the PCB side. So if I click here and I do a Control C, now I've got my point of reference. So this is because I've turned on that clipboard reference, and I'm going to put it down here just to exaggerate this so you can see it. So now my reference is somewhat has a distance between my component and my reference, and if I do a Control V, there you go. So now I've got my reference there, and of course if I try to rotate it, it will maintain that distance because that's my reference point. So I find this to be actually a very, very useful feature both in the schematic editor and in the schematic library editor too, and maybe something that you may want to consider to turn on, especially if you're already used to that muscle memory on the PCB side. The next one I'm going to talk about over here is to add a template to the clipboard, and I think that this is kind of a holdover to the days when everything was done in A-size sheets and prior to really PDFs kind of becoming more prevalent. And the idea behind this is that if I copy something and I paste it into something like Microsoft Word, I'm going to get what I pasted. So for example, if I take this over here and I do a Control C, and of course I have my clipboard reference still on, you can see the cursor point. I'm going to click down here. I now have it in my copy buffer. And if I bring up, oops, already spoiling this, I was doing a trial run here prior. Let's get rid of those. But if I go over here and I do a Control V to paste it, what I've basically selected is what I'm going to put down. If I want basically my template, so my SCHDOT or anything that I have set up around the periphery, and I want that to be added in here, I can turn that on here. And so if I go into my preferences, I can go into Add Clipboard, Template to Clipboard, and I will press OK. And let's say, for instance, I now take this one over here, and I do a Control C, and again, my reference is on, so that's why you see the cursor point. And if I go back into Microsoft and we do a Control V, you'll now see that the entire template is added on along with it. So it does make sense if you're going to copy everything. And again, if you're doing an A-size sheet, it probably makes a little more sense. But again, with the PDFs that we have today, this may have really become a little more archaic in its purpose or need. But it does, that feature does exist, and you can certainly use it. Now, there's another thing I wanted to mention over here too about the templates. One of the things that went away is this thing called design document options. So you used to be able to hit the D key followed by the O key, and it would bring it up. What Altium has introduced is this thing called the properties panel. And we're going to see this throughout my entire presentation today. And what it does is basically anytime you select something, it immediately brings up its properties. So the property dialog, which we've seen forever, has now gone away. It is now a panel. And I have to admit, I really like it. It's taken me a little while to find things because obviously I knew the dialog's a lot better than this panel over here. But the reason I like it is that anytime you get into a dialog in Altium, you lock out the rest of the screen. Whereas over here, you're seeing things in real time, and it allows you to move around a lot easier. So you're not always hammering away at these double clicks and then having to cancel or press OK afterwards to dismiss a dialog box. So that, to me, is a pretty useful property. But what's interesting about this one, too, is that if I want to get to document options, I just have to simply click on an area that does not have a primitive, and it brings me up to the document options. So as long as this properties panel is visible, I can see that. And as long as nothing else is selected, I can see it as well. So I have my general here. I can set up my custom, basically my templates if I want to use whatever default ones that they provided here. And of course, you've got over here the parameters as well. So that's what they're doing here for the document options in case you're looking for it. But that is the add template to the clipboard. The next one I'm going to talk about very briefly here because it's now gone away is called convert special strings. And again, the reason I think this went away is because you can easily see what each one of these strings represents if you just simply click on it. So let me zoom in here. So a parameter is a name equaling a value. And what I've got over here is my value. If I want to know what the name of it is, I can simply click on it now, and it'll tell me right here in the properties what it equals. In this case, this one equals author. If I click on 9.connect, it equals company name. Even if I got just an asterisk out here, it can equal this name that I gave called where's my value. Okay? And I think this is really useful. So rather than hammering away back and forth into the preferences and having to turn on this convert special strings on and off, it's just a matter of simply clicking onto one of these things and you can see its properties, its name, and now its value here very, very quickly. So I still recommend, though, even though you can now see this, it may make sense to still put things. This is what I do if I don't have a value for something. So in this case, this is author. Let's say it's a brand new design, and I have not really designated an author for this or the person who's going to design this here. I still like doing a bracket with the capital letters of the actual name of the parameter, and that prompts me to say, oh, okay, I know what this parameter is, I know what it's looking for, and I need to provide it some information. Because if I got a bunch of asterisks on it, then I've got to click on each one to figure it out. So it's just a little more visual if you do that. So that's just a little side tip for you there on that one. I'm going to hit VD so we can zoom out for a moment, and then we're going to now zoom in to the center of the objects command here. So I've got some electrical primitives and I've got some non-electrical primitives. And what I have found with this command is that if you invoke it, it works for the non-electrical primitives. The idea behind this is that it's turned off by default. If I click on something like this component or on this net or on this PowerPoint, so on and so forth, even on these over here, wherever I put my cursor, it may move it a little bit to put me onto a grid, but nevertheless, it's going to keep my cursor relative to where I placed it when I do a click and drag. If I turn this on, it's going to try to jump to the middle. So if I hit TP over here, and I basically say turn center of object on here, again, it doesn't seem to really impact the, let's try to grab that again. It really doesn't seem to impact the electrical objects. As you can see here, it's not really jumping into the center of any of them here. But on the non-electrical, it certainly will. So for example, if I click down here in this ellipse towards the bottom left corner of it, if you can call a corner an ellipse, you can see it kind of jumps towards the center. The same thing with this square here, and the same thing with this odd polygon. So they're kind of jumping towards the center. Now again, it's going to try to put you as close to the center as possible, but it's going to keep you on the grid. So I suppose it's kind of a nice feature to have. I think it even works on this line too. There you go, it did jump to the center of that line. So it's a nice feature to have, but it doesn't really work on electrical primitives, at least not what I'm seeing here. And it didn't seem to work in Altium Designer 17 as well, so I think this was probably designed this way to be for non-electrical primitives. The object's electrical hotspot. So I talked about this one a little bit earlier on. I had to turn it off. But basically what happens is that if I have this turned on and I click on something, primarily my component, it will jump me to the closest hotspot on there. So basically it drops me onto the closest pin. So let's turn that on and let's take a look at that. So I'm going to turn that one on. It is on by default, by the way. And when I click on it, you'll notice it immediately takes me to its closest pin. So if I grab on the top over here, let's grab that part here, you'll see again, it brings me over to the hotspot. Now the reason I kind of turn this one off is that if you're using the preferences, the clipboard reference in the preferences, and you want to, if you use it, this is going to override that preference. So for example, if I click on this here and I do a Control-C, I still have my clipboard reference turned on. And I'm going to put it out here as such. So I've got some distance between my cursor and my primitive. But when I do a Control-V, it ignores my reference and immediately jumps me to the hotspot. So I find that, in my case, I find it a little bit annoying, but that's what's happening with this. So we'll override it when it comes to components. So if you want to use that, it certainly could be a useful feature. At least it gives you a point of reference. But if you're using the clipboard reference, I think this is going to interfere more than anything else. All right, let's take a look at AutoZoom. So I do believe this is not properly working. The idea behind this would be that if I was zoomed out, so I think this is a view D, so it's a VD, so view document will zoom me completely out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the jump component command. And what I'm going to type in here is J for the jump, C for the component, and I'm going to type in J1001. And by the way, this is turned on by default. So when I press OK, notice that it auto-zoomed me in. It jumped me into it. So if I hit VD again, I'm going to jump out. However, when I turn this off, it still jumps me in anyway. So I've not been able to find a scenario where the auto-zoom, whether it's toggled on or off, shows a difference. If you guys know one, feel free to write some commentary in that. I'd like to know about it. But I wasn't able to find things. So I'll just demonstrate. If I turn the auto-zoom off here, and again, if I hit like the JC command and I type in J2001, it still seems to jump in. My take on this is, anyways, anytime when you're using a lot of these features in Altium where you're trying to select something or filter something, they give you the option to zoom anyway. So I'm kind of wondering if that feature may have become a little more archaic and doesn't really have a bearing, since a lot of the commands we use give you those options anyways. The navigator would be another example. Find similar objects would be another example too. So that's what we've got here on page 1. Let's jump over here and look at page 2. Okay. So the next thing we've got over here is single negation. So the idea behind negation, if you've done any digital work before, is that anything that's active low, you can put this little bar on top of it. That's how we used to do it when we were drawing things out on paper, blueprints. And Altium will kind of respect that by trying to draw that in here as well. So if it's turned off, which it is by default, if you have a basically, I'll click on this this net label because it also adheres to this concept here. You'll see that if you have a backslash after the letter, it will put a negation on top of it. So in this case over here for the junction A, the underscore and the N, both of these things are underlined because they have a backslash after each one. This works on net labels and it works on pins as well. I'm going to show this one just because, again, it's going to kind of show some of the features of Altium Designer 18. But notice here, it does not work on text strings. And also notice here that if I push this over to the PCB side, these backslashes, whatever slashes I put in there, become a part of the net name on the PCB side. They don't just disappear, so just be aware of that. All right, if I want to take a look at the pin over here, I will select once for the part. You'll notice in the properties, the parts come back up. Under here, we have something called the Pins tab, and then if we click on the little edit marker over here, we can now make a change to it. Okay, so that's where the negation is here. You'll notice there's a / over here, and the reason I have this / in here is note that it's not showing up over here. However, if I hit TP and I turn on the single negation, that / at the beginning will give me the complete negation on all of it. Now, just a side commentary on this, if you want to use this, that's fine and dandy. I've always stuck to the programmer's method of if you want to show negation, it's always better to show it with an _N or an _BAR_B. I get a little worried when I start seeing backslashes or asterisks or other things that are of a meta character basis. Those are non-alphanumerics. Simply because this net list may be pushed outside of Altium Designer to other tools, and they can interpret those meta characters incorrectly. So they don't take them literally; they take them as being something else. So I'm always cautious about this. But nevertheless, if you're doing negation, there you go. You've got some options for it. This one I crossed out. Double-click runs the inspector because by default, if I click on anything over here, it immediately brings up the properties. And guess what? The properties are not just the properties anymore. They're also the inspector as well. The inspector panel has gone away. So the idea behind this is that if you see the properties here and you select multiple versions of it, you can make those changes to all of these at the same time through the properties panel. So that's why the inspector panel has now disappeared from Altium. And as a result, this feature, which used to be in 8017 and prior, has now been removed altogether. But the idea on this was that normally in the prior versions of Altium, you double click into this and it would bring up the properties dialog. And if you turn this on, instead of the properties dialog coming up, you would instead get the inspector panel instead. So that's all that feature was doing. The confirm selection memory clear is an interesting one. I think it's a very underutilized feature. I know it's both in the schematic and the PCB. There used to be a little icon for it over here in the bottom right-hand corner. I don't know where those icons went. I don't know if there's a way to turn them on. I may have to play with the customs here a little bit, but they weren't on. You're seeing basically a default screen over here. This is what I got when I installed it. So what does this do anyways? Well, the idea is that if I'm selecting something like, let's say I'm going to select every one of these little dots here, and I hold down my shift key and I'm selecting these. Okay, so it's not something I can easily do by just sweeping over things. I need to hold down my shift key and select these. And I'm worried that I'm going to accidentally click off of it and lose all my selection. I can tell Altium to save this. So to save this, I can go into the edit menu and I can go into the selection memory and I can store it, and later on I can recall it and I can also clear it. And they've got some other things that you can do to add to things that you may have already selected, but nevertheless, the basic of it is I'm going to store this and I'm going to put this into one of 8 storage locations. This is in storage location 1. So if I click off of it like I just done and I want to recall it, I just go to edit, selection memory, and then I can recall it and I say recall memory 1. And boom, it now has done that. And then of course, if I do something like Control C and a Control V, I can paste it or manipulate it or drag it, do what I need to do with it. Okay. But if I go into edit, selection memory, and I clear it, it is now clear, but it gave me no warning. So if I go back into edit selection memory and I say recall it, it's not going to recall anything. So why am I telling you all this? Because this feature in the preferences will give me a dialog to forewarn me if I'm going to clear it. So that is confirm selection memory clear. And if the little button, if I can find it, I'm pretty sure it's buried somewhere here. One of the big things, the reason why they put that in there is because the graphical version of it was very easy to press the wrong button and clear it without realizing it. So they wanted to give you a prompt for it. But nevertheless, now if I do select this, let's select these again. I do have it turned on. And I go into edit, selection memory, and I'm going to store this into 1. And now I go into edit to basically selection memory again here. And now I'm going to clear it. now I get a message confirming, do you want to clear this? And I can press yes or no at that point in time. So that is the whole purpose of that confirm selection memory clear. Maybe hopefully a decent, maybe learn something here today about how you can save those things. And again, I'm pretty sure it's on the PCB side along with the schematic side as well. Let me do a view document here to zoom out. And so let's talk about marked manual parameters. All right, what happens anytime you place down a component in Altium Designer and you turn on their parameters that you have over here? Altium is going to basically, it's going to turn on its auto position. And what they mean by auto position is that when I take this and I start rotating it, Altium is going to try to do it's a best fit or best placement for it. It's not always the best, but it generally is trying to keep it out of the way of these pins over here. I think this is funny because it puts it right in the middle of the pins, but nevertheless, if I move these things, so if I move this over here like this, pardon me, if I move these here and then I start to rotate it again, Altium's going to ignore whatever I moved and it's going to basically put it where, again, it thinks it's best suited. So that's what the auto position is. If you don't like auto position, it's like forget that, then make sure you turn these things off. So you click on your designator, your variable here, and make sure that auto position is turned off. Now, if you have a design where there's a bunch of them turned on, a bunch of them turned off, and you want to know which one's which, Altium allows you to do that, and that's what this preference is. So if I hit TP and go into it, I'm going to pull this over here because it is a dynamic command. I can click on this thing called Mark Manual Parameters, and when I click on this and press Apply, you will see a dot. So anything that the auto position has been turned off on, you basically have said, I'm going to take care of this, and I'm going to put this relative to where I want it to be. And this is this mark that it's showing over here as such. One of the other things I'll mention too is that once you've turned off the auto parameters, these things will always stay relative to where you put them, even during the rotation. So for example, if I start rotating this, notice that these are kind of coming along for the ride. They're always maintaining it's always retaining its relative position regardless of which direction or rotation I'm doing here. Also notice that this one's upside down. There's another feature that's turned on by default. I'll talk more about this one in a couple of minutes. But that's the difference between the auto position and not having the auto position. I'll just leave that on for now because we'll see it again here in a few minutes. Let's move on to the next one over here. So this is always drag. I think this one's probably the most commonly used one in terms of changes. There's really two different ways of looking on this. So always drag basically says that if I was to take this component and I move it around, you'll notice it's moving around with the wires intact. Okay. And if I don't want the wires intact, I can hold down my control key, pull it away, and boom, there it is. It's now, I can basically forego that connectivity there by holding down the control key. And just by the way, one of the neat features with this being turned on is that I bring these two individual parts together and I put them on their hotspots, okay? And now I pull this away, it actually puts a wire in there for me. So a really nice feature to have here. Now, if you're not keen on that and you want to flip this around where you want to control when it's going to maintain its connectivity and when it's going to break apart, we can do that. So if I go into TP and I click on always drag and I press OK, now if I bring this in over here, this is now attached, but I can grab anything here and it will separate off without dragging everything else along with it as well. So that you can do it that way. If I hold down my control key, then it will allow me to drag it. So it depends on how you want it. If you want it to drag by default, you can, and then hold down your control key to disable it, or you can go vice versa with it. So completely up to you. I've seen people do it both ways. Shift click to select is an interesting one because I think that this one is, I don't know if they did some of these things on purpose or not, but I'm going to go through the motions and show you what it does anyways. I'm wondering if there's a little bit of a remnant of the old flavor versus the new way they're doing things. Because remember, one click would select, 2 clicks would get you into the properties here. Now pretty much if you just click onto it, it brings you into the properties. But nevertheless, if you don't want to just click onto something here and you want to hold on your shift key in order to hold on to it, to click onto it, you can do that. Let me hit the TP over here and turn it on. So what happens now is that now this is turned on. If I click on it, it does nothing. Okay. But if I double click on it, it now selects it, which in the past it wouldn't have done because in the past it would have brought up a dialog box, but the dialog box is already coming up on its own anyways. So if you do hold down your shift key and you click on it, then it will select it again. Or if you just double click on it, it'll shift. So I don't know if that was done on purpose or if that was just a remnant of something from the old versions and they just hadn't really defined what happens during certain types of clicks. But that's what it does. I do not like this one on because my muscle memory is very much set to clicking on something and expecting an immediate response. So I'm going to press OK on that. And I think that takes us over here to the end of page 2. Let's jump on over to page 3. Click Clear Selection. This one is an interesting one. If you think about it, anytime we click on something and then we click on another thing without holding down the Shift key, it deselects. In fact, if I click in the empty area here, it deselects both of them. Well, if I want, I can have it so that it always maintains the selection. This, I think, would take a little bit of muscle memory here, especially if you've been using it for so long. But Click Clear Selection, I'm going to turn that off. And what happens now is as long as I'm just clicking on it and I'm not holding down my Shift key, then I get all of these things. Okay? So the only way I can turn these things off is either I do a Shift C, which is a clear. That's another button that disappeared over here, so I'd like to find where I can get that one back. Or so you can do Shift C to clear it, or if I select it and then click on it again, it will deselect it. So that one's going to take a little bit of muscle memory, but there's probably some merit to that one there. So I am going to turn that one back on. The next one I'll talk about is Place Sheet Entries Automatically. This is a cool one. You may as well leave it on. Okay. So what this does is that if you're working on a top-down design, normally if I had a brand new sheet symbol and I need to take this information and put it over here, I would have to draw the line, then I would have to draw the sheet entry, and then I would have to go into its property and change the label. Altium will do it for you. Oh, and then you also have to make sure you get the orientation correct as well. So by having this turned on, if I hit the place wire, so I'm going to do a place wire over here, and I drag it in, boom, it instantly does it. So not only gives me the name, not only gave me the sheet entry, but it also gave me the orientation as well. So if we look over here, this one is now an output, whereas this one over here is now my input. And it effectively does it for buses, and it also does it for harnesses as well. So if I do place bus, so that's a PB, and I click over here, I now have my bus. If I want to do a harness, that is place H is for harness, and then there's a sub-menu to it. So it's PHH, so I'll click the H again. I'll put this over here, and voila, I got my harness as well. So I think this is a very, very useful feature. I don't really see a need to turn this one off at all. Let's do a view fit on this here again. The next one is Display Strings as Rotated. So we did get to this one now. And you'll notice that these are auto positions off, so we do see the mark manual parameters because I didn't turn that feature off in the preferences. And the auto position is on in this one as well. So if I go over here and I start rotating this, okay, so I'm going to rotate this now, you'll notice that this feature is turned on. So it says Display Strings as Rotated. So this is now upside down. If I go to 270 degrees, you'll notice this is going top down. This is going left, right. This is going bottom up. It doesn't matter whether this thing's turned on or off or not. Auto position is going to ignore it anyways, and it's going to put it where it wants to put it. So this is only for those things that are the auto position is off. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this one upside down again here because this is a dynamic function. I'm going to pull it to the side so you can see what happens here. So if I turn this one, I need to turn this one off. So I'm going to go to Display Strings as Rotated, and I'm going to hit Apply. Watch what happens over here to the upside down header 2 and the P2008. When I hit Apply, these now will always show right side up. Let's press OK here so I can bail out of this here. So it doesn't matter how I rotate this, it'll either always show bottom up or left right. It will never show upside down, and it'll never show top down. And that's with the auto position turned off. Again, it has no bearing or impact on auto position when it's on. The next one is Reset Part Designators on Paste. This is turned on by default. I'd say leave this one on. The idea is pretty simple. If you select something, you do a Control-C. I still have my clipboard reference on there. I do a Control-V, and I paste this down. You'll see that these designators have been reset. And if you turn it off, basically you'd get another set of 2006 and 2007 designators over here. The reason I say leave it off is that there's a really cool little command. It's a static command, but it's a neat little command a lot of people overlook under Tools, Annotation, and you can do Annotate Schematics Quietly. And what it will do is it will look at all of your parts on all of your designs, and if it finds a question mark, it will actually give it a brand new unique number. So I don't want to do it here because it will impact several of my other preference sheets over here, and I don't want to do that. And it doesn't give me the option of doing it on one page. You'll do it across the entire project here. But nevertheless, it's a very useful feature. But it is static, meaning that if I place down another component or I do another copy, it's not going to automatically take that question mark and give it and assign it a new designator for that. So that's just a little side note for you there. But I think that's a feature that you definitely would want to turn on. The next one is kind of an unusual one. I don't know how you'd feel about it, but I'm going to show it to you anyways. So if you have certain colors, and not only for your ports, but also for your sheet entries here, the net, if you use a harness, it's going to override the colors. So let me zoom you in here. So I'm going to do a PHH. So again, that's place harness signal, and I'm going to go between C and this RGB. And when I'm done over here and I click off of it, you'll see that whatever colors I had over here got overwritten by whatever the signal harness color is. And the same thing will happen on the ports as well. So if I again do PHH and I click on this here, these white and black ports over here have now become the color of the they've now become the color of the harness. Notice that they're not doing the same thing necessarily with the lettering here. So the lettering is preserved, but the color of the sheet entry or the port is no longer preserved. So that's what that one does. I'd say I'll leave that one up to you as to what it is. You know, if you don't like that and you want to maintain those colors, you can easily turn that off. What other goodies we've got over here? So the next one we'll talk about very briefly is net color override. And I do want to keep it brief because I think number one, it's probably one that we should spend some time doing a video on or a webinar a little bit later. It's a really cool feature that's evolved over time. It used to be the highlighting feature in Altium Designer. And what people say is like, look, if I'm going to highlight nets, and that's what you're seeing over here, if I can highlight them in the schematic, I want to be able to highlight them also in the PCB. So in the PCB, I can have two colors assigned to every trace that I've got there. And that would be the layer color. And I can also see the color that was given to it maybe in the schematic, or a special set of colors I'm giving it, so I know that the thing I'm looking at happens to belong to a certain net class or to a certain, let's say a bus, like a bunch of data lines or a bunch of address lines. So the way you do this, and they changed this twice on me here. So in prior versions, like in Altium Designer 15 and prior, there was a little highlighter that they had here. In Altium Designer 17, they moved it up to the top icon tray. And then now in 18, I don't know where the icon tray went, but I'll have to go look for it there. It's probably they just need to turn on. But nevertheless, if I want to get to it, I can go to View, and I can go to Set Net Color. So that's the other thing, too, is they no longer call it highlighter. They set net colors, and that's probably a more apropos name. So the idea behind this is I can pick a color, let's say like fuchsia over here, okay? And I can click down over here and I can change this net color. And what's neat about this is I can take this information and push it over to the PCB side. So on the PCB side, I can also assign colors and I can push it back to the schematic as well. What this preference is trying to do is turn things off. And I'm not really sure why, because the F5 key, if I really want to hide these things, I just hit the F5 and it will hide it. If I hit F5 again, it will bring it back up over here. But if I do turn it off, okay, so I turn off the net color override just to show it to you, what will happen is that if I go back into View and I go into net colors, and let's say I'm going to make this a light blue, it's going to immediately balk at me saying, like, if you want to use this feature here, you got to turn it back on. So if I press no, it bails me out of the command. Okay, so I'm not really sure why they do this, because if you really don't want this information to propagate from the schematic side to the PCB side, or if you want to hide it, there's ways of doing that. So to hide it, I can hit F5, right? So I click on F5, it turns it off, turns it on. But if I don't want anything to propagate from the schematic to the PCB side and vice versa, I can handle that in the project options anyway. So in project options, I can go into the comparator tab here. I can scroll down, and there's this thing called change net colors. That's the one you turn off so that you would disassociate whatever highlighting you do on the schematic side from the PCB side and vice versa. So that is what that switch is all about. All right, the next one we're going to talk about is auto pan options. So I decided to make a little track here so we could kind of see this thing in action. So they did change this up just a little bit. They didn't add any new feature here, but in the past this used to be a drop down that had 3 options. 2 of them you see right there. So the auto pan fixed jump, which is the default, auto pan recenter, which I'll show you here in a minute, and they also had disable auto pan, but instead they made that into a little checkbox over here. So if you turn it off, it just turns off the auto pan altogether. So if you're in a command like place wire, you would have to use the page up key or the page down key or some of your mouse commands in order to zoom in and out. You just completely disable the auto pan option. What I'm going to do over here is I'm going to turn this on, just kind of walk you through what we see over here. So auto pan fixed jump, we can do the speed in which it's moving. So every time I hit the edge, it wants to know what speed you want me to respond to that, and what's the step size as I move along. And if I hold down my shift key, do I want it to accelerate, or I can make this even slower, like decelerate it. So let's give an example of this over here. If I jump into a command like place wire, so I'm now over here with my cursor and I start moving my way over here, you'll notice that I'm moving at a pretty decent clip, but what it's doing is it's jumping every 300 mils. If I zoom this in just a little bit over here, just so I have a little more space to work in here, I'm going to start this again, but then I'll hold down my shift key and you'll see that it really picks up because now it's jumping 1,000 mils rather than 300 mils. There's 300, there's 1,000. And so you can play with that depending on how you want to adjust your zooms there. I think they, by the way, the PCB side has this too, and they even give you more features to it. The other thing is the auto pan recenter. It's kind of a neat little feature. So again, if I go into place wire and now I'm into a command that requires auto pan, watch what happens when I hit the edge. Boom, it puts me right in the middle. So if I jump down to the bottom edge, again, it will put me into the middle every single time. So that's another way of doing it if you're kind of concerned about over zooming things. Sometimes the problem what you got with the speed is the speed versus the zoom size. It works really great when you're zoomed in, but then it doesn't work as great if you're zoomed out and vice versa. So that's what we got over here. The next one is color options. So let's talk about that one here very briefly. The color one, let's do a view fit so we can see everything. I'll talk about undo, redo here in just a moment. Sheet color options. Okay, so what this is that if you select this over here, okay, you'll notice that there is a green box around this. Okay, and if and ignore these little green boxes over here. Altium controls that, but the color of this box that you see around here, the selection box, that is something that you can control. So if I go in here, for example, and I turn this into red, and I press OK, you will see now that when I select this, this box is now red. Notice that anything you select, actually, it does put those dashed lines in there. I think the lime green is the best color because it does contrast against the white, but it also contrasts against different darker colors too. So this red isn't too hard to see. Hopefully you can see this with the granularity of the GoTo meeting, of the GoTo webinar here. But that's what that is that's doing here. Let's jump over here for a moment over to the undo redo. This was removed in Altium Designer 18. I think for two reasons. Number one, there's two features there. There was the stack size, and then there was also this thing called the group undo. And I think a lot of people, number one, didn't use the group undo. The idea was that if I was in the, let's say I'm placing a wire, and I start drawing these things, so I'm still in the same command and I draw these. Okay? And what the group undo would have done is that if I hit Control Z, all of these would have disappeared if I had the group undo turned on. Okay, so if I do a Control Z here, you'll notice it undoes each one individually. That was the default, but you could turn the group undo on and it would get rid of all of these. And I think a lot of people found that that wasn't very useful. They would prefer to step it back one at a time rather than wipe out an entire group of things. So I think that was one of the reasons they got rid of this. The other reason is the stack size here too. You know, once upon a time when Altium was around, there was only so much memory that they got to work with. So if you allocate a stack size, you're allocating memory to it. But I think now that there's 64 bits and there's so much memory there, who really cares what your stack size is anyways? I mean, you're really going to do 50 undos? Maybe, maybe not. But this is something that probably Altium said, look, we don't really need to give them this kind of access or control at this point because there's plenty of memory to handle all these undos. So that's kind of why I think that this whole undo redo went away. I was not able to find it in any of the other preferences. If you do spot it or see it, let me know. Here's the other one that we'll talk about very briefly is the cursor type. So the default one that we see, so when I do place wire, you see what's called a small cursor 90. Okay, there's three others that they provide as well. So if we go into our preferences here, here's the large cursor 90. The only reason I bring this up is that there are two merits to it. So if I hit place wire, the reason why this is kind of nice is number one, if I am in some type of command, I'll know immediately because I see this huge cursor over here. And secondly, it does give me some relative positioning for the horizontal and the vertical planes. That's the only two reasons I think it's kind of useful there. The other two that they provide here, I won't go into them just because I'm a little pressed for time, but they have a small cursor 45 and a really tiny cursor 45. The only reason they really put these in here is that other tools use them, and if people were coming in from other tools and they preferred to have that style or they were used to that style, Altium wanted to make them feel a little bit at home there. So that was really the purpose behind it. So that covers the graphical editing page over here. Let's jump on over to the compiler. The compiler here, in fact, I'm going to reset the defaults on this page and I'll press apply because the warning is generally not turned on by default. I must have turned it on here when I was doing some warm up and practice prior to this webinar. And you probably saw a lot of blue squiggles, and that's the reason why it's not turned on by default, because every time you place something down, you're immediately going to get a warning because you haven't had any time or opportunity to connect it up. But if for this case, I will turn it on just to show it to you. So these are the different warnings, and those are the squiggle lines that you see on your screen over there. In fact, let's make the fatal error one here a green so we can differentiate it here, and I'll press OK. So let's go on over to our page on this. Let's go back to our projects, and let's go back to compiler 1. Okay. Now this, once you compile it, you'll see this, and some of this is almost like an online DRC as well. What I want to mention to this, hopefully everybody knows this, but I think for those who are somewhat new to Altium Designer, you got to remember we're dealing with the ERC, which is the electrical rule checker. It's somewhat different than the DRC, which is a design rule checker on the PCB side. To basically control these errors or warnings or fatal errors, we need to go into project options, and there's two areas for that. There's the error reporting, so you can either turn these on or give them a different severity. You don't have the same flexibility of a query language in here, so it's kind of an all or nothing proposition. The connection matrix over here gives you a little bit of extra capability too. So if you have certain pin designations, like one might be an input, another one's an output, you can say, hey Altium, if I connect an input pin to an output pin or two output pins to each other, I want you to determine if that's okay or not for continuity and smoke tests. Now in this case here, I purposely changed these two output pins here to be a fatal error. It's not like this by default, but it's something I did just so that you could see what happens as a result of that here. So here's an example of a warning. So you see the little squiggle lines, and if you want to see where the squiggle is here, you just got to put your cursor somewhat in the right place there. Let me click once there to get onto the editor. And now you can see this, that it says warning unconnected objects in net. So that's my warning. And I've got an error here. So in this case here, I gave duplicate designators. So I'll put my cursor over here, and it now says duplicate part designators. It's an error. And here again, because I changed this to be a fatal error, I created this over here as such. And it's not the greatest of examples, but if for digital, this would be useful. This says fatal error, nets containing multiple similar objects. So that is what I did over here just to show those examples. But that's all controlled by this feature here. The other feature that you see in there is the auto junction feature. So this is dynamic. I'm going to pull it over here to the side, and I'll zoom it in a little bit so you can see this as I go about doing it. So I'm going to again go into my preferences. I hit the letters TP. If I go over here, and I'm going to talk about the wires here, but it really does things pretty much in real time. So if I make these really large and I turn these lime green, okay, and I press OK here and I click apply off my screen over here, that's what you're going to get across your entire schematics and all your projects here. Same thing with the buses over here. We'll make this one this kind of purplish, I guess magenta if you want to call it that. We'll make this medium. I'll hit apply again, and so you can really turn these things upside down, inside out. If I go back over to the defaults and say, okay, give me the default ones here, and I apply them, and then they'll go back to the way we normally see them. The drag color, I've tried to work this. I've had another colleague of mine look at this as well. We thought that the idea behind this is that if you were to drag these things, that it would turn these into that color that you've got here. However, what I normally see happen, let me press OK here to bail out. Normally happens though, is that when you take this and you drag it, you don't even see those, you basically don't even see the junctions anyways, and then it puts the junctions back in afterwards. And the only reason you're seeing the red here is because originally, remember that selection I gave over here. In fact, let's change that one back. This one is red. Let's change this over here to lime green, what it normally was before. So when I click on this over here and I drag it again, they disappear and then they're recreated. So I'm not really sure what the drag feature is doing. We think that maybe it was supposed to show these while it's dragging, but Altium seems to make them disappear during the drag anyways. So that's all we're going to get from it. The only other mention I'll make here is there's a feature that was in the prior versions called manual junction connection status. It went away. Glad it kind of went away. It's kind of a silly command anyways. If you were doing a four-way junction with a manual, okay, so you can, Altium can now do four-way junctions. In the past, it wouldn't do it because they were trying to adhere to ANSI standards. There was a lot of uproar about it. They said, look, this isn't really working. So there's no reason not to do it. And so they said they'll do four-way junctions. What I mean by that is if I place a wire and I come over here and I place this one here, and then I place another wire, I should have left it in the command, it now allows for this four-way junction. In the past, you couldn't. You would have to put a manual junction down. What this would do here is if you place the manual junction down based on the size and the color, it would put a junction behind it. And it was kind of like a junction on a junction. And I thought it was kind of an unusual type of thing, but they got rid of it, and probably all the better. This next feature is actually very useful if you're doing multi-channel design. So let me jump back to the compiler here. I'm going to turn all of these on. And the reason why this is really useful is that when you're doing multi-channel design, you've got the same design being used multiple times. that same schematic sheet. I'm going to put all these to always display. Okay. And what happens is that because you have that stuff gets pushed over to the PCB side, and the net list is going to kind of be consolidated a little bit, or it's going to be expanded depending on what it needs to do to represent each one of those lines. And in other cases some people may completely re-annotate their PCB design, so all of their annotation on the PCB side will not necessarily match up with those of the schematic side as well. So what this does is it really shows you what the compiled name of all these different things are. So I've got a really great example of that for you here. Here's the old mixer project. I love this project. I hope Altium still makes it available on their website. The reason I like it is it's a really great example of how to basically do multi-channel design in Altium Designer. So let's focus in on the input channel here. This has been repeated 8 times. So in this design, it's represented once, but it's actually 8 times in the design. I'm going to hold down my control key, double click it to get in, and I'm going to show you where I'm at. I'm at kind of the bottom. And I like this here because I did set up the document number and the sheet number here. It's already been compiled. So what happens here is that I see basically what I'm seeing is what I had done initially to draw this together. But when Altium compiles it, I asked it to compile it for 8 times, right? Because it's an 8-channel design. So I click on CNI1, and now what I get here is I see what Altium considers to be part of the CNI1 channel. So the net names will change, okay? And I don't know how well you can see this. So hopefully you can see this. I don't know about the granularity, but they'll show you what the original name is here. So if I go back to editor, you can see what that name is. You can see what now the name is for this here, or what it may have compiled down to. You can see what the net labels are, probably not net labels, the port labels are before and after. So you can see those have changed. You can see the designators have changed. So if I go over here, you can see the designators changing here versus what the original is. You can also even see that the sheet number and the document number over here gets changed up a little bit here as well too. So I think it's a really useful feature if you're doing that type of work, and you can turn those on. The next one I'm going to show you, it's probably where if I'm losing my hair, it's probably this is the one that helped me lose my hair. And this is the one, it's called AutoFocus. So what this is supposed to do is that if you turn these on during certain events, you will dim the other objects. Or if you turn this one on, once you place it onto a wire that has other things, the wire will flash thickly for a moment, and then it will go back to its normal space. And then lastly, the zoom one, it will push you in and it will zoom you if you're trying to make a certain type of edit. So the best thing I can do is, rather than try to show all these things, because I found them to be a little bit, some of them seem to work, some of them don't. The best thing for me is to turn them all on, and I'll try to demonstrate them to the best of my abilities over here. So let's take a look at the page I've got set up for this. This one is AutoFocus 1. And let's take a look at this one here. So the idea is that if I was to take this part and I pull on it here, notice that I have zoomed in, and notice that I have dimmed. Okay, when I let go of it over here, it zooms me back out. Now, sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. If I bring it back into the family over here, watch the wire, it did flash a little bit, so the delay over there is kind of quick. And of course, if it's zooming, it's going to play a little impact on that too. So I'll make the delay a little bit slower here so you can see it. So when I pull this out, again, you can see that the other components have been dimmed out, okay? And then when I pull this back in over here, you can see it's a part of that family. It did flash, and it became thinner again. If I was zoomed out and I do this, it will zoom me back in, and then when I'm done with this, it will zoom me back out. So in terms of differentiating the individual effects on each of these, I found that kind of difficult. It seems like the on-the-move one works all the time. The placement one was kind of intermittent. I just figured I'd show you what they do in general. So if you want those type of notifications or those things flashing on the screen, that's where you would do it. For the library AutoZoom, this is kind of an interesting one, and I'll go through each one of these things here. So the default on this is to center each component in the editor, and it will zoom it. Right now, the default is set to peg to show as much as it can. Let me open up the mixer.sch lib here, and what I'm going to do is bring up the SCH library. So I'm going to click over here. Notice what happens as I go through each one of these components. It tries to fit it, and that's because of this particular preference. As I go through each one, it's fitting it, whether it's large or not. So I'm going to leave it over here. Let's go to TP for a moment, and I'm going to say, remember last zoom for each component. This is an interesting one because this actually would take some memory to do it. Let's say I'm over here, and I zoom this out, and I put this in the top right corner, and then I click just below it over here. So this is its location, and let's say that I pan this one. So I'm going to pan this one over, and I put it in this corner over here. If I go back to the last one I was in, it remembers where I put it the last time. And if I click on this one, it remembers the last time. And of course, some of these other ones, let's see, there we go. So on this one over here, it went back to the center. I think this may be an alias. That's why we see it twice over here. But nevertheless, that's what it does. So that's that feature there. The other feature we've got is do not change the zoom between the components. So let me press OK here. And what that means is that if I put this one in the top right corner, it doesn't matter which one I click on over here, it's always going to put it relative to where my origin is. So those are the different flavors you've got for that one over there. All right, I'll put this one back here as such. The last one that I'm going to talk about here is the default. And the default is one that I've always liked, and I think in one sense they did a really great job improving this. In one sense, I wish they had still added a feature I've been asking for here. What this does is this shows you every single primitive that either the schematic or the schematic editor, schematic library editor knows about. And you can set these up to whatever color and way you want them to be set up. So the one I've been playing with over here, I'm going to, and by the way, they give you a filter here because it gets pretty big. I'm going to go to the drawing tools. I'm going to take the polyline here. I've been playing with it, so it's just one I'm familiar with that I can show you rather quickly. So what I'm going to do here is, well, first and foremost, let's just reset all. So this is what this is. This is a blue with a small line over here. Actually, that's the arc. Let's go back to the drawing tools. And let's go back to the polygon line. So it didn't change that one. Okay, fine. We'll go over here to, let's just change this one to medium, and let's just change this one back to blue. So what this does is it allows me to set up all of its preferences over here in the schematic preferences. So when I do a polyline, so let me jump on over here back to a page I've got set up for this here. This is under defaults. Okay, let's go there. And now I'm going to do a place drawing tools. It's actually under polygon. And when I draw this, you'll notice in the top right corner that in fact, if I hit the tab key over here, it allows me to pause this and I can bring my cursor up over here. And you'll see I had it set for large and here's my blue. So if I click over here and continue, I'm going to place this down. Okay. Actually, it's my, sorry, it's my polyline, excuse me. Let me go here to place and we go into our drawing tools. It's the line. So this is actually called a polyline. That's the one I want. There we go. We draw that in there. Now, what happens if I change it? Okay, and let me make sure my TP, I'm going to turn the permanent off. So if I don't have the permanent turned on, what will happen is that if I do this command again, and let's go back into place, drawing tools, and I'll go back into my line, and I start this line and I hit my tab key. Okay, again, I pause over here. I'm going to say, no, I want a different color. Let's take this red over here, and I want this to be much larger. Okay, and I'm going to continue now. So you'll now see that I've changed this. Here's the deal. If I bail out of the command and I start the command again, so if I go into place and I go into my drawing tools and I do my line, guess where it starts off with? It changed my original settings and now it is set to this over here. If I don't want that, I can go back into this here and I can turn on permanent. In fact, if I go back over here to my drawing tools and I go back to my polyline, you can see that this is now the permanent. So if I want to make this blue, there it is. If I want to make this medium again, I can. I now have this permanent. Now, the thing about the permanent is it makes all of them permanent. So that's why I'd almost like them to have a feature where they had an individual selection for permanent. But nevertheless, let's go through the motions of that again. So if I go to place and I go in my drawing tools and I select my line, so I'm going to draw this again. So here I go, and now I'm going to hit my tab key, okay? And I'm going to change this over here again to this dark red, and I'll make it thick again. So I'll make this large, and I'll continue here. Okay, let me get my backspace, clean that up just a little bit, just make it look slightly more professional. What happens is once I've bailed out of the command and I go back into it again, because that permanent is now turned on, okay, and I start my line again, it is now blue. Okay. So that is the feature. I do like the fact that they now made it very easy for us in this particular preference to select on any of these and instantly get into the properties, where in the past you would have to double click into each one. And again, you go into a dialog box and you would have to bail out of the dialog box in order to get back into the preference page over here. So they've done a really great job with it. Again, I wish they'd make this permanent available for each and every single one, because some of these things, it's really important that they're permanent, and some of them you could care less if they're permanent or not. So that's probably my only hope that they'll add in there in the future. So those are the schematic preferences. All right, I do have a poll for you. And so if you can take a minute to take a look at that poll, I would appreciate it. So this next poll over here is, now that you've seen Altium Designer 18, doing that. Okay, it looks like a good portion of you, almost 2/3 of you, said that you'll take a look at it, and if not immediately look at it, that you're still thinking about it. And a very small percentage says no, you'll not use it. And I'm pretty sure that the smaller percentage, probably because you're working on projects or you're content with the current Altium Designer that you have, and that's perfectly okay as well. Well, folks, you are here for a reason. So I'm going to bring this back up here if you don't mind. You are here for a reason. And the reason you're here is because you want to know Altium Designer a lot better, and that you want to know that there are features in here that may better assist you. Hopefully, today you've seen some really cool things. You say, you know what, I'm going to turn those things on. I want to make use of those things. We also know that with a busy schedule, you don't have a lot of time to investigate into these things. Like we did last time and like we did this time, we put a lot of time into it. Trust me, this autofocus over here was quite an effort on our part to try to get it to at least respond accordingly. But you have to do experimentation, you have to do research. These are things you just can't do when you're trying to get designs out the door. So we're happy to do that kind of stuff for you here. The preferences are certainly something bigger. It's a part of this thing called configuration management. What is configuration management? It's the look and feel of your libraries, your schematics. It's all about your templates, no matter what's your PCB or your schematic, your mechanical layers, your preferences. And it's also the management of your documents in your library. Really, in short, it is your workflow. So what do we provide over here? Well, we do understand configuration management. We've helped a number of companies with it. We provide custom on-site training. We like those the most because we get to meet you. We get to see your workflow. We see how you're trying to do things and where you're trying to go with them. And you can also call out the number of days and topics that are driven by you. So if you're interested in this, feel free to take a look over here. It's a little bit, you have to go into our service section over there, our training section, and take a look for what we call area 9.51, and you'll see what we call configuration management. That's one of our special trainings because it's a customized one for you. If you want more information about 9.connects or any of the things that you see here from prior webinars, including this webinar, feel free to go onto our website over there. We will post this one soon enough, and if you're interested in it sooner than later, certainly let us know about that. We are going to try to get this out here pretty quickly. In addition to that, if you actually want my schematics that I use to put these little examples together, I'm more than happy to provide those to you as well. So thank you very much for joining us over here tonight. I was able to pull it just under the hour. And more importantly, I will take a look at any of your comments. Feel free to write those things in before you go. I'd like to see what they are. And of course, if there's anything that you can do in terms of what I'll call train the trainer, those things that maybe I missed or those things that didn't make sense to me but make perfect sense once you've explained them to me, I'm always appreciative of those. Our next webinar is going to be on the 31st of January. This is an exciting one because we are going to talk about DDR and its practicality. So we've got a couple of people working on DDR projects for some of our customers, and we're learning a lot about DDR, and we want to share that knowledge with you. So we hope that you'll sign up for it. Stay tuned for those email messages in terms of signing up for that particular webinar. Again, thank you so much for your patronage, and we look forward to working with you in the future. You take care and have a great day.